Hey folks, MasakoX here. Now I bet you're thinking how on earth this could have happened. Krillin becoming a Saiyan. Unless of course you've been watching the last 16 parts of this story, then you would know exactly how that came about. But for the uninitiated, or those brand new to the channel, first of all, welcome to you. But allow me to give you the basic thought process behind it. Supposing that Krillin made a wish to be more like Goku after the power gap between he and the rest of the Dragon Team was becoming ever more apparent after his fight with Piccolo Jr., that Shenron would decide to be a bit of a smart aleck and literally make Krillin like Goku, as in he became a Saiyan without him or even Goku knowing what a Saiyan was at the time. All that Krillin realised at the time was that his potential went up, his lust for battle had grown, and he had a tail now. But in any case, with Krillin now more of a monkey, he had become a very worthy equal to Goku's power as well. And yet, Krillin still secured the bag with 18, but the more intense, wilder, and exciting 18. In the last part, we tackled the aftermath of the very intense battle between father and daughter, or at least what people thought was father and daughter. Hercule, who had been taken over by Babidi, completely wasted his own daughter without even knowing it. But luckily, Gohan had come in clutch with some senzu beans and got her back on her feet shortly afterwards, and finally got into her good books. As that delayed interaction was going on, Krillin and the Dragon Team were briefed by the Supreme Kai about the likes of Babidi and Deborah, and promptly set out to investigate said menace. However, they realised that this potato wizard was a very scary individual who had thrown his two Earth minions away like a piece of rubbish. And then, Deborah stoned Piccolo and Tenshinhan in this story. Only a cheap but hilarious shot from Lazuli, who used her android stealth mode to a very immense advantage, meant that Deborah nearly got taken out there and then. But Babidi saved him from certain death, then to facing certain death later, when the Dragon Team had managed to bulldoze their way down to the lowest levels of Babidi's ship, and almost about to nullify the sealed ball too, containing Majin Buu. Can they stop it before other things go amiss? Well, remember that Vegeta is here, so anything is possible. So we see the Dragon Team face off against Yakon, and Deborah is simply breaking it right now. After all, these fighters have been able to get the jump on him. He, the King of Demons. And had it not been for Babidi's intervention, he probably would have been wasted right then to these mortals, leaving nobody to protect the wizard from achieving his goal of bringing Buu back. His hope for Yakon gobbling up their chances were very short-lived. Within minutes, Goku had figured out the same idea that he had done in the original and overwhelmed Yakon with energy, causing the beast to explode thanks to its own greed. The stage was set for Krillin to take the lead and challenge Deborah. Even though he was incredibly weakened by their prior engagement, Deborah still faced them down. And nothing to do with the fact that Babidi had screamed his head off for him to get in there and fight them, suck it up. So really, the Demon King had no choice but to comply. But back at the World Tournament, Gohan and Videl had been talking whilst the rest of the tournament had gone down. They weren't really paying attention in what was going down in the actual ring, other than when Gohan stepped in because he was actually still in the contest, and did his matches, and he actually easily won. Quite frankly, this was a walk in the park, and it did indeed lead to Gohan winning the 25th tournament without him really acknowledging that he had done. He was just making up the numbers now. It had barely registered with him, since he was more preoccupied with what was going down far away from here. He had sensed Piccolo's energy being tempered somewhat, not knowing the stone tomb thing, and then remaining static whilst the others were moving around. But they hadn't wavered too much, so he wasn't overly worried. That was why he ultimately stayed at the tournament, since the gang seemed to be handling themselves okay up until now. They didn't really need his help yet. So he was sort of on autopilot with the tournament battles, but indeed, he walked away with the crown and the prize money, to which Chi-Chi was very pleased about. I always told Goku to make money with his skills, but would he listen? Oh no, at least my son has sense. Gohan was still not really paying much attention, but now it was more to Videl being the distraction. She was finding him to be a very interesting specimen indeed. Well, they had no idea about the fact that Hercule was dead. That would have been a buzzkill, I can assure you. When the hype had died down, and Gohan was busy with the press conferences, not the conferences he actually liked, Marron walked up to Videl and asked her whether they were dating now. Videl was blushing profusely and found it hard to answer a toddler such a forward question. Well, it's complicated. Marron blinked. Mama and Papa are complicated too. She then laughed, as if she understood the situation because, to be fair, her mother was a future badass cyborg and her father was an ex-human now Saiyan prodigy. That's kind of complicated if you ask me. Videl found the little kid quite endearing. She reminded her of herself back then, with her father quite the busy guy. She hoped that her dad would come back to his senses soon and try and make amends and explain why he had gone crazy in the ring and almost tore her apart. Well, again, that's going to be complicated in itself to explain that away. Back on the third floor of Barbody's ship, Krillin was ready to take on Dabura. Dabura spotted Lazuli watching on and looked extremely nervous, but thankful that he wasn't taking her on. He had no read on her thanks to her not giving up normal energy. He considered her a freak. What kind of life form was she? A badass, that's what. As for Krillin, he had fought him before, but not when he was going full beans. That would become clear soon enough. In seconds, Krillin went into Super Saiyan and began to tear into Dabura with convincing ease. Barbody, who had been watching this go down, was starting to get a little bit nervous. His only crumb of comfort right now is that the energy that was being exuded from this battle, in his own ship, was helping to fuel the sealed ball. If he could keep them fighting at their strongest, then they would unknowingly be bringing about their own foolish demise. This is how he was coping at the moment, knowing that he was smarter than all of them, even that blasted Supreme Kai over there, who was watching on with so much copium.
Oh, I can't wait to crush your spirit once more, Kai.
The Spud said with smugness. That self-praise was masking the situation at hand, in that Dabura was simply being handed left, right, and centre. Since he was still under the control of Barbody, he was still aware that his sacrifice would be going towards Boo's revival, and that kept him in the fight, because otherwise if he didn't have that, he would have run away. But that didn't dull the pain, though, that he was experiencing. He tried to undermine Krillin thanks to the fact that it worked with Hercule, but this time, the monkey duck wasn't listening to any of this. Your flunky tried to shake me out of my groove, but I ain't gonna work a second time! Second time? It worked the first time. That might just be enough. Krillin chalked this up to Dabura trying to wriggle his way out of the pressing matter of him losing. So he decided to press the matter even further, and then tore into Dabura. The last thing that Dabura saw was the former human staring him down with determination and focus, knowing full well what he was and what he was going to do. Lazuli was impressed with this display, but also deeply saddened that she wasn't the one to tank Dabura. She had gotten a taste of that earlier, but wanted to be the one to wipe that smirk off his face. But, you know, compromise marriage. The Dragon team were impressed. Nobody had gotten badly hurt. Barbody had no remaining fighters seemingly to bring them down because he wasted 2 of them, and the amount of energy that he had gathered was not quite enough to summon Boo out from his slumber, so Barbody was very, very nettled right now. What was he going to do? Piccolo and Tenshinhan were freed from their cement crypts and tried to gather their bearings as to what was going on right now. They could sense the group further down the ship, and as such, were clearly doing very well. Piccolo then used his ability to talk to people, telepathy, thanks Kami, to communicate with the Supreme Kai to ask what was happening down there, assuming that the others might be busy fighting. He then finds out that Dabura had been slain, and now the only thing that remained to be done was to find Barbody and stop him. Do you need us to step in? But before he could get a reply, Shin was distracted by Barbody's next tactic, this being the signal for Piccolo and Tenshinhan to definitely make their way down to help. Since he had yet to find any cerebral openings amongst the Dragon team to control their minds and bodies, and since Vegeta hadn't yet lashed out at Krillin or anybody, and it becoming obvious to him his grievances with Krillin, nobody was able to become a margin. The best thing that Barbody could do now was to just try and fool those fighters into thinking that the fight wasn't over. Since they were on Barbody's ship and very close by, he was still physically safe, he decided to make use of his home advantage to change people. Just then, Krillin could no longer see Goku, and Lazuli could no longer see Vegeta. Instead, they had been replaced with random, strange, strong minions who looked a lot like Deborah. For Vegeta and Goku, they also couldn't see their colleagues, and saw these mirages in their stead. What they had no idea of was that Babidi had altered their perceptions of their friends and made it out that they were now fighting other minions. But in actuality, they were just going to end up fighting themselves.
Excellent. Their simple minds were so easy to distract. With them thinking they are fighting other enemies, they won't hold back and tear themselves into shreds. Oh, how moronic these fools are at the hands of the great Babidi!
If you want to boil it down, they all rolled perception and got 1. As for Shin, he could see the whole thing go down and was completely unaware of Babidi's japery. What are you all doing? Stop this! What has gotten into you all? But his voice was being dulled by Babidi's magic, which was at its strongest in its own ship den. As the 4 of them were going at it, Babidi could see the gauge going up with each and every minute. It wasn't rapid, but it was a steady climb. But this then got the attention of Gohan. Back on Papaya Island, when the last questions had been answered, Gohan was busy having a drink with Videl as Chi-Chi and Bulma were getting ready to head home with the kids. Then he could sense Goku, Vegeta, Lazuli and Krillin suddenly going all out. What the? Had another fighter come in? Granted, Piccolo and Ten Shinhan were okay again, that was the silver lining, but this all didn't feel right. He told Videl that he had to go and help his friends, but he would be back soon. Gohan sped off as fast as he could to the scene to help wherever he could, even though he had no idea of the context behind the malady. Back in the room, Krillin was utterly perplexed with this demon he was going up against. Man, it's like he knows my every move. It's like I'm fighting Goku or something. What kind of tricks is that wizard up to? He was so close to figuring it out, but the duck presumed it was simple stalking and research over the years, and not the fact that his eyes were playing tricks on him and he was actually fighting his best friend. For Vegeta versus Lazuli, it was even harder to fathom, since Vegeta and Lazuli had never fought one another before, and their encounter was just completely blind. For the prince, he was choosing not to worry about this too much, sensing this was the challenge that he had asked for earlier, and he was game for this.
Ha! At last! I was beginning to get bored.
Smartass, are you? Quit talking, you oaf! I'm going to crush you.
Vegeta, hearing this from a demon, gladly accepted this, and it kept going. Babidi was enthralled with the spectacle, basking in his own splendor, but now blissfully not paying any attention to Piccolo and Ten Shinhan's swift arrival. With no more fighters to block their path, the pair's descent down into the depths of the spaceship was much swifter than the Dragon Team's first encounter. When they got down to the level where their colleagues were, they were left wide-eyed with disbelief.
They're fighting each other.
Ten Shinhan was extremely rattled.
What's going on? What's caused them to go off the deep end like this?
Shin turned to face them with a look of relief.
Piccolo, Ten Shinhan, thank goodness you're here. We need to snap them out of this. Babidi's taken over their senses somehow.
The trio set about grabbing onto the fighters to try and pull them out, but this led to the combatants simply feeling disorientated. They had no idea that their allies were holding onto them and trying to bring them back to reality. They couldn't explain it away. This was leading them to assume that, oh, this was like fatigue, like there was a big weight on their shoulders. Piccolo was getting tired of this after a while.
This is getting us nowhere!
Babidi was reveling in his discovering of these two, and their complete lack of effectiveness. Ten Shinhan then had the idea of trying to think like the Saiyans since 3 of them were present. With that, he raised his fist and whacked Goku in the head as hard as he could. You see? Hit them really hard. There you go. Goku snapped out of Babidi's control and could now see the bizarre turn of events going down around him.
What's going on? Where's the demon guy I was just fighting?
They never existed, Goku, said Shin. We've been trying to tell you for ages. We got to stop the others from doing themselves even more damage.
Goku had to admit that he was starting to get a little tired from his encounter, and as such, he aided in helping knock some sense into the others, and one by one, they fell out of their distorted realities. Babidi had not sensed that coming, but his mind was placated though by the sight of the sealed ball. It had made a beeping sound, and the energy gauge read 100%. It was time. With that excellent news, he chose to bask in his glory and transported all the occupants of the room into his den, where the ball was contained, and welcomed them all. He thanked them oh so much for their contributions into waking Majin Buu. He turned to the Supreme Kai.
Oh, Shin, you were so close to stopping me, but those meatheads of yours you relied upon were just so malleable.
Shin stamped the ground.
We fell for it! How could we have been so blind?
Sure enough, the fighters witnessed the birth of Majin Buu when he had burst forth from the container and into the eyes of his awaiting targets. But that's where we're going to be leaving things for right now. If you like this story, why not check out this one, where Majin Buu kept his skinny ways in the Tournament of Power and did ourselves a huge favour. And I shall see you in the next video. Catch you later!